Welcome to Natural History of California. So we're going to start out with the first lecture, just kind of doing an overview of the class and some of the different kinds of things we're going to talk about over the course of the semester. So what is natural history? We always got to start out by defining what it is we're talking about. So it's basically an account of natural phenomenon, observing nature around you, and with human nature, it's always about trying to understand why things are the way they are. Goes back even, the concept of understanding nature goes back to Aristotle and a manuscript he wrote, the Historia Animalium, so the history of world or animals in this case. Also to other people in ancient Rome and and probably even before that. I think you could argue humans have always been interested in studying natural history. Could have been because it involved our survival. If we didn't understand the world around us, we wouldn't be able to survive. So part of it involves describing living organisms, whether we're talking about deer or plants or algae or fungi, things like mushrooms, excuse me, could involve fish, especially in California. We've got a lot of rivers that run through the state, many of them that empty into the ocean. We've got a special type of fish. These are actually rainbow trout, but we've got salmon, anadromous fish that are born in freshwater, migrate to the ocean, spend a few years out there growing, and then come back to fresh water to spawn, and then typically they die. So a big part actually of understanding the world around us, specifically the animals around us, involves their habitats. Pretty much their space, their home, provides everything they need: food, shelter, water. And again, whether we're talking about plants like these Joshua tree that are indigenous, unique to California, or whether we're talking about any other living things, including humans for that matter. Water is a big part of our world. Obviously, all living things need water to some degree. So understanding the role that water plays, we'll be talking about that. We'll be looking at the different habitats of California, the different types of habitats that exist in the state, and certain characteristics about each of them. But again, it's all about how these animals relate to their environment. Again, it may be food, but it's also cover, shelter. It's a place to breed. It's a place to raise young. For a plant, it's a place where the seed can fall that's safe for the seed so that it doesn't get eaten before it can germinate. It is always important, though, to remember that we're still part of this environment. We, more than any other animal, have the ability to change the environment pretty dramatically. And we create all these wildland-urban interface areas where we have us kind of carved out a niche in the environment, and yet we still have these areas around us that are still basically native habitat. We're pretty fortunate in a lot of ways to live in California, at least as far as the environment goes. Maybe some of the politics or the rules and regulations, taxes kind of get to people, but it's a really cool state to look at from the standpoint of natural history. We have a variety of climates, but predominantly we're dominated by what's called a Mediterranean climate, which is a climate that has mild winters and relatively pleasant summers. So it allows for a lot of plants and animals to develop. We have a lot of diverse topography, everything from oceans to mountains to desert to grassland to all sorts of habitats dominated by trees. So that diverse topography creates a diversity of the landscape that creates diversity of all life. And then, of course, we have a lot of interesting geology. We have active volcanoes, we have dormant volcanoes, lots of fault lines, but again, lots of different areas with a lot of different types of geology and diversity. You have 24 different climatic zones to be specific. Again, along the coast and so forth, we're dominated by what's called a Mediterranean climate. But the 24 different climates vary dramatically from virtually no rain upwards 120 inches of rain per year. Again, from deserts to what basically would be considered a rainforest. And not only do some of the deserts get no rain, but they might not get rain for years. And yet there's still life there that's very specifically adapted to living in that kind of climate. You get up high in the mountains near the tops of the crest of the Sierra Nevada, and you can be below zero. You can have winters that extend for 8-10 months out of the year, very short growing seasons. But again, plants and animals have adapted to even living in those really extreme climates. The opposite of that is the 130 plus degree temperatures that can happen in Death Valley. Furnace Creek, a good name for that area, obviously, if it gets up to 134. But some of the hottest places on the planet in California as well. And again, everything in between. There literally is just about every option in California as far as habitats and climates. As I mentioned, we have a lot of diverse topography, high elevation mountains near 15,000 feet, actually 500 peaks over 10,000 feet in California. But then the extreme opposite of that is Death Valley is actually a couple hundred feet below sea level, actually the lowest place in the United States. We have a very dominant topographic feature, the Central Valley from Bakersfield all the way up to Redding, so that extends 400 miles long. An ancient seabed that's now dry land, basically. The largest estuary in the United States, centered around the San Francisco Bay. As big as the Chesapeake Bay is on the East Coast, we still have the largest. We have mountain ranges that you probably know run north and south, the Sierra Nevada, the Coastal Range, the Cascades. But we also have transverse mountains down south to Hatchpeas. So different topography, creating different diversity and habitat. I mentioned we have volcanoes from the Cascade Range, predominantly the Lassen being the very northern extent of the Sierra Nevada, Shasta starting the southern end of the Cascades, major fault lines, all sorts of rock units. California has experienced glaciation in the past, where it's been cold. In an ice age, glaciers extended across the elevations, higher elevations of the Sierra Nevada mountains, retreated as the climate warmed, left behind dominant features like Lake Tahoe, meltwater scour the glaciers scoured out the rocks and left just bare rock. When it melted, then it filled in the basin, and we have Tahoe. 158,000 square miles of land and water. Again, not the largest state, but we're up there. 1,200 miles of coastline, and even lakes that are at high elevation, as well as all of the other aquatic ecosystems around the state. So the map showing the elevations of the state, from the highest elevations again in the Sierra Nevada all the way down to the lowest below sea level elevations in Death Valley. The book talks a little bit about our universe. We're in the Milky Way, of course. just one solar system in what's probably just about an unlimited amount of space out there in the universe. As they say, just one tiny little speck in the sky. Billions and billions of stars around us. Again, we'll talk a little bit about planets, just a small little bit. You obviously take other courses if you're really interested in this sort of stuff. But again, we are one of those planets out there, so it is relevant to make sure you understand the very large picture around us. We're always called a blue planet because we literally look blue from space because of all the water, all the ocean that covers our globe, providing water, which again is one of the major things that provided for life on this planet to evolve the way that it did. Talk a little bit about why life happened on this planet. We won't really get into, evolution or any of those types of topics in this class. Save that for environmental science or principles of biology. But a lot of the right conditions were just the right distance from the sun. Again, we have lots of water on the planet, which is where life began in the primordial soup, as we tend to call it, the water and the mixture of chemicals that existed. Very different climate, 4+ billion years ago when life began. And actually, life over time changed our planet to be the way it is today as far as the atmosphere. There's always the question of how you get from things that aren't alive to life. So basically the idea that the right conditions existed on the earth to be able to synthesize small organic molecules. The building blocks of organic or biological molecules were already there: hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, simple sugars and things like that. And so again, all given lots of time and the right conditions, we basically built something from all the little bits and pieces of parts that were left behind. Talks here about part of that process, rainwater being able to dilute some of the solutions that were accumulating and making polymers, building simple, small, single strings of molecules and being able to build multiple strings of molecules from that. And again, given lots and lots of time, we were able to develop more complex organic molecules that could then make copies of themselves. And again, given billions of years through the process of natural selection, we have the diversity of life that we do. Here's sort of a taxonomic tree just showing how life evolved from common ancestors, given lots of time. Again, notice the time frame there is in millions of years, so 4,500 millions of years is basically 4.5 billion. So given all that time, we were able to evolve the diversity of life. And in California specifically, we have a huge diversity of life. Again, so many interesting things. People always get, interested in, I got to travel to Europe, or I want to go to South America or somewhere else. And that's great. I mean, there are a lot of places I still want to travel to as well, but you could spend a lifetime really just traveling California and hiking in all of our national parks and state parks and recreation areas and see things that are as cool as anywhere else on the planet. Our bristlecone pines going on the other side of the Sierra Nevada by Bishop and Lone Pine. You get up in the mountains there, and we have the oldest living thing in California. Some of these bristlecones are in excess of 4,000 years old. We have the tallest plant on the planet, the coast redwood. We have the most massive plant, living thing on the planet, the giant sequoia that are up in the Sierra Nevada mountains. So not only the tallest, but also the most massive. We have the biggest animal as well, the blue whale. Now, they migrate up and down our coast, but they very much do depend on California for part of their niche. Some other really interesting facts: 40% of living things in California are endemic, meaning they only exist in California, nowhere else on the planet. So almost half of the things in California are only found here. Over 178 major habitat types, 5,000 native plants. Unfortunately, a whole bunch of non-natives as well. Just birds alone, over 500 species, over 200 species of mammals, almost 80 reptiles, almost 50 amphibians, 80 plus species of freshwater fish. And again, that doesn't even include what's in the ocean or off our coast. Everything from banana slugs and our state flower, the California poppy, to all sorts of different interesting things that we find only in California, or that are just abundant and easy to come across in California. So, with that introduction and kind of getting you a little bit focused on what we're going to be covering for the rest of the semester, the next thing we're going to look at is geology. So we'll be getting into that in the second lecture.